Hello. Today's video is going to be a bit of an add-on to my show versus tell video, where I'll go more in depth about descriptions and details. The first thing I'm going over is how much detail to add and when. If you add too little detail, then the reader won't know what's going on. If you add too much detail, then you run the risk of overloading the reader and giving them a brain fart. So what do? The answer depends. What genre are you writing in? Are you writing a fantasy where the reader would love every detail imaginable, or are you writing something a bit more fast-paced like an action thriller where droning on with the details would be counterproductive to the tension you're trying to build? What are you trying to focus on? Are you elaborating on the main character or some random character that's there only for one scene? Would adding or subtracting details interrupt the flow of the story? Too much and the reader could forget what's going on. Too little and the story could be jarring due to a sudden shift, which both of these would break immersion. For my next segment, I'll start by reading a passage from Make Every Word Count. A lot of readers have a hard time catching on to the idea that writing that works is not the creation of life on paper. It's not surprising when you consider that people like me are constantly badgering them to write about real people, listen to the way people really speak, and watch for the way things really happen, the way people really gesture, walk, laugh. But that doesn't mean you have to capture all of life as it occurs during a single moment at a single place and imprint the image on a piece of paper the way you would with a camera. It means you should find the words that will connect to the contents of the reader's mind to create an illusion of real life. The writer chooses the words that will unlock memories the reader didn't know were there. The writer steers the reader's brain onto a few of the millions of tracks available to it. And, if I may switch metaphors just one more time, the reader merely begins the drawing, the reader extends the lines. This message applies to writing in general, and we will discuss it in detail in Description That Works. For now, it means that you create visible, believable characters not by telling the reader everything about the character, but by drawing in the part that will make him extend the lines in the direction you intend. Because the reader is doing most of the work of creating character, you don't have to use many words to characterize minor players in your stories. And what I take away from that is the whole, you don't need to describe every minute detail of a character or the world. For example, if I were to write, Jill was 6 foot with wavy type 2B level 1 black hair. Her almond-shaped dark brown eyes were always surrounded by sapphire, charcoal gray, and jet black eyeshadows from MAC. I could go on describing Jill, but I don't want to. And this leads to my next talking point. Be careful with technical and brand-specific details. To take my last example, unless you're really into hair, you wouldn't know what a wavy type 2B level 1 black hair would look like. A hairdresser would be like, I know what you're talking about, but everyone else would need to Google what they just read, which would break immersion. With specific brands, and I'll extend this to cover specific locations as well, again, those familiar with them will continue reading. They may even enjoy the specific details, but those who don't are going to be confused. Look at this example from Confessions of a Shopaholic. I'm not going to read it because there's a few things I have no idea how to pronounce. Pause the screen to read it. Most of the things listed in the example are region specific. As someone who lives in the state, I was like, My suggestion would be to ask yourself, are these specific technical terms, brands, or locations common enough for people to know? For example, the Eiffel Tower or McDonald's. If you answer no, could the specific details be deciphered using context clues? Is it necessary for your story to have these exact precise details? For example, is it set in New York, and if you didn't include specific places, then it wouldn't feel like New York? The last thing you would ask yourself would be, are you okay narrowing down the amount of people who would enjoy your story? As I've mentioned before, it's hard to be entertained if immersion is broken, and if someone needs to keep searching what these details are, then they wouldn't enjoy the story as much as someone who didn't need to break away from the story. This next segment is on how to write descriptions of locations and people. This part is influenced by my opinions, and as usual, take these as suggestions and not rules. My first example from Bird Box is on how not to describe a place. This, Tom says, is the living room. We hang out a lot in here. Mallory turns to see his hand is gesturing towards the larger room. There is a couch, an end table with a telephone on it, lamps, an easy chair, carpet. A calendar is drawn in what looks like marker on the wall between framed paintings. The windows are covered by hanging black blankets. As I've mentioned in my show versus tell video, this is nothing but a list, and nothing unusual is mentioned besides the calendar and the windows being covered by blankets. Something else that makes this bad is all the short sentences. Lamps, that is a single word sentence. Carpet, that is a single word sentence. An easy chair, that's a short 3-word sentence. Periods are hard stops. With so many hard stops just to describe this place, it becomes slow, and it's trying to bring importance to those single word sentences. It's also not very detailed. What kind of carpet is it? The tight knit kind, the wool kind, the shaggy kind? What color is it? Brown, beige, white, green, etc. My next example is from the Monstrumologist, and it deals with describing a character and a place. The director of facilities was a small man with ruddy cheeks and dark, deep-set eyes, his prominent forehead framed by an explosion of cottony white hair, thinning as it marched towards the back of his head, calyx raising from the mass like waves moving towards the slightly pink island of his bald spot. His office was at the far end of the common area, a cluttered, claustrophobic room dominated by a mahogany desk with a broken front leg that someone had attempted to level by placing a book beneath it and the dingy carpet. The desktop was hidden beneath listing towers of paper, manila file folders, periodicals, and books with titles such as Estate Planning 101 and Saying Goodbye to the Ones You Love. On the credenza behind his leather chair sat a framed photograph of an elderly woman scowling at the camera, as if to say, "Don't you dare take my picture." I assumed it was his wife. The reason why I like these 2 paragraphs is mostly due to word selection. For describing the man, it lists things that are unique to that one character. Not everyone has ruddy cheeks or a thinning hairline and such. For the place, although there's nothing special about papers, folders, and carpet, having those things listed helps enforce the idea of a cluttered, claustrophobic room. And the mentioning of the picture frame helps bring that room to life, making it appear to be a personalized workspace. These last 2 examples are from Harry Potter, and they focus on describing characters. Nothing like this man had ever been seen on Privet Drive. He was tall, thin, and very old, judging by the silver of his hair and beard, which were both long enough to tuck into his belt. He was wearing long robes, a purple cloak that swept the ground, and high-heeled buckled boots. His blue eyes were light, bright, and sparkling behind half-moon spectacles, and his nose was long and crooked, as though it had been broken at least twice. This man's name was Albus Dumbledore. Perhaps it had something to do with living in a dark cupboard, but Harry had always been small and skinny for his age. He looked even smaller and skinnier than he really was because all he had to wear were old clothes of Dudley's, and Dudley was about 4 times bigger than he was. Harry had a thin face, knobbly knees, black hair, and bright green eyes. He wore round glasses held together with a lot of Scotch tape because of all the times Dudley had punched him on the nose. The only thing Harry liked about his own appearance was a very thin scar on his forehead that was shaped like a lightning bolt. He had had it as long as he could remember, and the first question he could ever remember asking his Aunt Petunia was how he had gotten it. I'm not really a fan of how Dumbledore is described. I mean, it's fine for a side character, but to me, it feels like I'm reading an author making a list of how a character looks. What I like most from that paragraph is the nose being long, crooked, and looks like it's been broken at least twice. On the other hand, I love the paragraph that describes Harry Potter, because along with knowing how Harry Potter looks, you get a feel for the environment and his relationships. The bit of him living in the cupboard and how he has hand-me-downs, add on where he sleeps, and it shows that his aunt and uncle don't want to spend any money on him. They are doing the bare minimum to take care of him. Add on how skinny he is, and you can guess that his aunt and uncle barely feed him. His glasses being broken by his cousin obviously shows Dudley doesn't have a good relationship with Harry. And what do you think it says about Harry as a person, that the only thing he likes about his looks is a scar? So if you're able to, try to describe your main character like this, where it's not just how they look, but it weaves into the environment or the character's relationships with others. This last segment is leftover stuff on the topic. To circle back to the overloading thing, when you go into detail about something, you are bringing focus to it. You are saying, this is important. Remember this vivid image. And if you are constantly describing things with the utmost detail, not only could it mess up the flow and pacing, but it could overwhelm someone to completely forget everything they just read. In a sense, think of writing similar to music. Some parts, like the vocals or the guitar, are more prominent, but other parts are more subtle, like the triangle in the background. The more detailed words are prominent, and everything else should be working in the background as support. And I have one last question you may want to ask yourself. Is this thing I'm going into detail about aligned with my intention for the story? To sum up the example I read from my show versus tell video, if you go on and on explaining how a dog looks when you're trying to write about how a girl was attacked by a dog, it puts all the focus on the dog and less on the attack, essentially going against your intention. And that's all that I have for today's video. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my video. I hope it was helpful. Don't forget to wear sunscreen, and I hope to see you again. Bye for now.